Hello, you've tuned into State of South Asia, a podcast from Himal Southasian, where we have the best minds on the region to unpack crucial issues affecting our politics, cultures, environments, and societies. I'm your host, Nantara Narayanan. Himal is an independent magazine completely free of government and corporate interests. Support our in-depth, independent South Asian journalism by becoming a paying patron. Go to our website and click on Support Himal. You can become a patron for just $5 per month. In October 2024, 2 months after the monsoon revolution in Bangladesh toppled Sheikh Hasina as Prime Minister and her Awami League government, four gender experts wrote a column in the Bangladesh newspaper Prathom Alo about the women leaders of the movement. They said that these women had been invisibilized in the initiatives and discussions around rebuilding Bangladesh. In the months since Hasina's ouster and the formation of an interim government, Bangladesh has also seen a resurgence of its Islamic parties, particularly the Jamaat-e-Islami, in the country's politics. This has raised concerns about these parties trying to enforce restrictions on women's participation in public life. In February, for example, a group called the Islami Andolan Bangladesh organized a protest rally in Rangpur in the northern part of the country against a girls' football match, calling it un-Islamic. Police cancelled the event and asked the teams to return home for their own safety. There has also been much discussion across the country about incidents of violence against women. In March, students from 30 colleges in Dhaka held a protest against what they called a rise in violence, rape, and torture of women, demanding that the interim government institute maximum punishments for perpetrators. This protest ended in clashes between the protesters and law enforcement, an incident that had echoes of the clashes that took place during the monsoon revolution itself. On this episode of State of South Asia, we talk about the status of women in Bangladesh, what is happening with the feminist movement in the country, and how the country's politics, which is still in a state of flux, is affecting women. I have Samina Luthfa joining me from Dhaka. Samina is a professor with the Department of Sociology at the University of Dhaka and is an expert on labor rights and gender. Samina, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's first talk about what is being seen as a rising tide of violence against women in Bangladesh in recent months. I want to ask why you think there is such a rise in incidents. So, is this a problem with law enforcement under the interim government? Or has there been a change in the way crimes against women are being reported or the focus on them? Or are there other elements contributing to this perceived rise in violence against women?
The answer to this question is not really easy, or I cannot really answer in yes or no, because I think maybe the reasons that you just identified, all of them might be actually behind the sudden rise. Because at one hand, we always know that when there is political instability in any country and in any society, it affects women in a negative way the most, and especially women, children, and other marginalized communities. And that's what we have seen in the last 9 months as well. So the deteriorating law and order situation right after the upheaval created a lot of unease and feeling of lack of safety for women, especially in public sphere. However, and you have rightly pointed out that the women who were at the forefront of the movement and the uprising, and women of all walks of life, women from all different age groups also and ethnicity, were actually very vocal and active during the uprising. However,
Mm.
right after the ouster, we have not seen many women when the talks of, like, constructive talks and leadership of the country and things like that, we have seen that women have kind of vanished into thin air, as if. So what we see here is, at one hand, the very long, our age old patriarchy, which is at play as well, because this is not new for Bangladeshi women not to be able to enter the political sphere, public sphere. This is nothing new. But what is new after the ouster, after the uprising, is that when we have seen during the 1952's language movement, 69's uprising, or even 71, and in the independent Bangladesh, all the other movements, political movements, had women participation. However, every time we have seen that right after the movement is done and successful, women used to vanish again. Uh,
Mm.
However, this time, I think women are not accepting this fact. So they're putting quite a fierce fight, and they are trying. I wouldn't say, let me rephrase, they are actively pursuing a career in politics, and especially very young women who were voices of the movement, maybe not the voices of the movement, maybe they joined later, but however you may see their contribution in the uprising, what we see now in the last 9 months is a lot of young women are very interested, and they're actively pursuing their career in politics, which actually makes them visible, although they are small in number. And because they are small in number, their visibility is actually creating a lot of ripple effect, because these one or two women who are coming out are actually at the center of attention for the patriarchal society, who actually did not see women as any woman politician as a politician by herself. Because even
Mm.
though we had continuously been led by governments which were led by women, like Khaleda Zia or Sheikh Hasina, for decades, however, they actually represent the men behind them, so either the father or the husband, and now maybe the sons. So it's kind of it's this patriarchal understanding and perception of politics in Bangladesh, which actually did not really create a space for women's voice, and her agency. So now, post 5th of August, we are seeing that women are trying really hard to get onto that table, and that actually has also brought a lot of cyberbullying and a lot of hate
Mm.
mongering in the cyberspace for them, and this actually attracts our attention to the fact that women are being bullied for coming to politics. However, I think this is such a new phenomena that I was not surprised to see such
Yeah.
reaction from the patriarchy, I would say.
Yeah, so that's a lot to unpack there, and we'll get to each of those points one by one. But if I can ask you, what are some examples of the ways in which women are fighting against invisibilization? You said there's a handful of them. Are they joining political parties? Are there other ways in which they're making their voices heard in the political sphere?
Yes, they are joining the parties. They in the new party there are women, who have their political aspirations for next elections and everything, and also in the old ones as well. We can see that there are more women who are actually being seen on stages and things like that. Because in the first few weeks, women completely got invisible, and we didn't see them in any of the talks or any of the panels. And right then and there was a lot of reaction to that from the
Mm.
feminists of Bangladesh. Like, where are they? Where are the women who were at the forefront? And then, although it started out as a sort of token presence of women in every panel, however, now it has become more like a more, I'd say, more organically bringing them in the table of conversation. However, I wouldn't say that everything is all, rosy, because we have. I know that you also probably have noticed the increase in attacks against women, and which has been mediatized in a way that actually gives projection of Bangladesh after Awami League being unsafe for women. You know, um, the fact that women have been violated and there were attacks, there is no way that we can downplay that. The onus is actually on the government, the interim, who have failed to give protection and safety to women. However, the way they were mediatized, we understand that there is a political motive behind politicizing attacks on women. For example, there were 3,000 games around the country, across the country, of the footballs. However, only one or actually three got cancelled by some of the local political groups who tend to be
Right.
more religious and on to the sort of more right wing politicians stopped these three games. And among these three games, even two got rescheduled and actually were later on that actually happened. The game was there. People watched and cheered and everything happened. So it was postponed. Three games were postponed. Two were actually reconvened. Only one got cancelled. So from among 3,000 games. So those 3,000
And that
games,
was the one that everybody reported on.
yes, it got reported by all the international media
Mm.
houses. So you understand there is a sort of I do not want to say that this one game should not be, the government cannot avoid the responsibility to with the fact that they could not they failed to give the players the safety that they could play for this one game. However, the way it was overblown by the international media definitely has certain sort of political motive behind it. And the fact that even after that game, all the different incidents, which are not really uncommon in Bangladesh, like women being attacked in public sphere, I think it's as unsafe as it was. However, the feeling, sort of the perception of women who are living in this country are worse.
So, what's the interim government's response been to the protests, to the demands for measures to ensure women's safety and for justice for crimes against women? What have they been saying in response to that?
For the crimes that are done against women in terms of, in the last 9 months, only one, in case of one rape case, we have seen speedy trial and a verdict against the perpetrators, which is also, I think, is not really a safe thing to do, because
Mhm.
when you try to speed up justice process too much, it can actually raise question about the due process and things like that. So what happens
Yeah.
is, for that only one case of rape case of a minor, I think she was a child, right? And this
Mm.
child, it actually enraged the whole country, and everyone was so up in arms about it that they had to show that they are doing something about it. However, I am quite disappointed with the way government has handled this whole situation, with the
Mhm.
with the violation of rights of women, their human rights, their rights to be present in the public sphere. And I think our disappointment also comes from the fact that we have expected more, because these are all champions in human rights, in environmental rights, and in other women's rights issues for the last few decades or so. So when they are in power and we do not see, rather we get mixed messages at this crucial juncture when women are trying to come out and be vocal about their rights. And that's when the sort of fundamentalist right wing groups stopping them, trying to impose barriers on them. And when they do this and they're violating women, and when they do this and there is no clear message from the government that we are not going to accept these crimes, or we do not see that they are taking steps to stop these kind of things, only after the fact, after there is a lot of hue and cry, there's a lot of protests and public opinion, only then they will show that they are trying to do something. That's actually giving a very bad message to the women of the country, that their government is not behind them and they are actually alone in this. And also, I need to emphasize on the fact that when these attacks and concerted effort to stop women from getting equal rights, may be it in inheritance or in income, and when this report of the interim government's women commission were made public, and then we saw another big wave of protest and criticism against women's rights and feminists and women rights activists across the country. And it was starting from slut shaming to whatnot to established women seniors who have been active in the movement, have been active in favor of human rights, women's rights for a long time. And we all know them, and they are credible activists. And these people were, cyber bullied, they were verbally abused, and it in a manner that actually was really concerning, and we were all very troubled. And then we have seen that women came out, and they actually right after the rape cases, they came out and did protests, and right after the big rallies of fundamentalists against women's rights, we also saw big rallies of women in Dhaka, where women from all walks of life joined, and it was crowdfunded because a lot of Bangladeshi women movement is often tagged or critiqued as being fed by Western ideas of feminism, especially by the NGOized women's movement people, because it's kind of like it's part of a business, right? Like if you compare NGO led movement in, for example, West versus in countries like Bangladesh, it's a bit different, because the NGOs are very unlikely to be independent. They are very much dependent on the government for many things, as well as the foreign funders. So this Moitri Jatra, which was called by women, and there was no organized group. It was like everyone. There were like 500 or more women. They formed a WhatsApp group, and through that group, they organized this huge rally in Dhaka in mid-May, and which created a lot of ripple. People were talking about it. A lot of people joined in as well. So you asked for the examples. Examples are numerous, but these are big examples where women actually were organizing and trying to come out. And the sisterhood, they're revising the sisterhood, so that I would rather say that it's two-pronged, because at one hand, the whole idea that Awami League, women rights activists and feminists are all Awami Leaguers, is a perception in Dhaka. So after Awami League left, women's lives are ruined. This is another perception that is being projected outside as well. So when these women were trying to organize, they had to fight against the inaction and lack of steps from the government in one side, and on the other hand, they also had to prove that women's movement in Bangladesh can actually independently grow without being tagged as Awami Naribadi. So Naribadi became like a feminist. The Bengali of feminists is Naribadi. Became a curse word because of all these connotations. So that's why they had to move back and forth from trying to make or create or organize something which is free from both. So they didn't want to be tagged as something which is government funded or Awami funded, which is against the government. Because anytime you say anything against the government, there is a tendency to tag you as Awami sympathizer in Bangladesh now. So, or if you are saying anything in favor of women, you kind of get all different corners or quarters of people enraged. So that tells you that organizing and being present in the public sphere is actually the right thing to do. And if you do that, you can enrage everyone. So that actually tells us that this is working.
Yeah, so it's a fight on many fronts. Himal has been covering Bangladesh and the rest of South Asia for more than 35 years. We bring you cross border stories that you won't find anywhere else. In the episode notes, you'll see a story about how India's warped narrative of an anti Hindu Bangladesh imperils its own future standing, by Himal contributor Zia Hassan. It takes a lot to do this kind of in depth, independent journalism, and we rely on listeners like you. You can support the magazine by becoming a paying patron. Click on the episode notes or go to our website himalmag.com and click Support Himal. You can also sign up to our newsletters to keep up with our latest stories, events, and more. Now back to our conversation with Samina Luthfa. Samina, you showed us how, in the case of those football matches, there was overblown reporting about the one instance where, a right wing religious group had stopped a football match. The other two, which were cancelled, were actually rescheduled. But I do want to ask you, about the role of the Islamic parties in Bangladesh after the monsoon revolution. Now, one of them in particular, the most prominent one, the Jamaat-e-Islami, it has all this historical baggage for not supporting the liberation war in 1971. Its conservative policies have not been particularly popular in Bangladesh for all these years because in Bangladesh, Sufism is more inclusive, Islam is more popular, and civil society has generally had a secular outlook, which has also hampered the Jamaat's electoral successes. When the monsoon revolution occurred, the Jamaat used it to kind of rebrand itself as being as one with the revolutionaries. And in the following months, it's tried to project itself as being progressive and inclusive. How do you see the role of this resurgent Jamaat when it comes to the welfare and progress of women?
That's a very difficult question because in the public sphere, what we see, what they tell people is that if they come to power, then they are going to give equal rights to women. However, we also know that Jamaat works in a manner which is not always clear to the public eye because there are different
Mm,
kinds of organizations like study circles and which are not really political organizations, but they have different kinds of roles, creating sort of like a public opinion in favor. So when with this Women Rights Commission report, it was quite clear because all different quarters who do not actually agree with equal rights of women and men, which is enshrined in our constitution, actually
mm,
came out, and the way they dealt this matter, the way they addressed these with the words they said, the logic and reasoning they provided, it all actually exposed their patriarchal mindset and how they do not see women's rights as equal to men. And this is something which is, I think, also I see it quite positively in a sense that now it's clear for women in Bangladesh who are organizing and who are trying to have their voices out. They know who stands where, so everyone's
mm,
baggages are out, so we know everyone's standpoints. Now, the most interesting of all these, especially in case of Jamaat-e-Islami, I think, because of their historical role, or you have rightly pointed out that it has been really difficult for them to gain electoral prominence in Bangladeshi politics. However, using the July uprising, we have seen that their younger generation have tried to sort of, gain some strength out of it, and they did gain some strength because people like who would never ever sit with people from Jamaat Islami started to sit with them. So
mm,
there was a certain level of acceptance that was created as if because of their participation in the July uprising, because the leadership now probably were not involved, especially the students wings were not even born, so they do not, or maybe quote unquote, they did not carry the burden of genocide in 1971 or being the collaborators of genocide in
right.
1971. However, the way I think they are addressing this, and same as the case with women, the way they came out and tried to delegitimize 1971's liberation war, the way they wanted to delegitimize, and they're trying still, erase names of freedom fighters, reduce their privileges and things like that. It actually
Mm.
is not working in their favor, because to my understanding, for people in Bangladesh, a sort of non-negotiable point is 1971 and the genocide. And because of that, the more aggressively Jamaat-e-Islam tries to, project their or erase their role in 1971, or not have any remorse of what they did, not being held accountable for what they did, it's not going to sit well with common electoral the voters. And therefore, I think the more aggressive they are, the least they're going to be liked. And if there is a free and fair election where people can go to the voting centers without fear, then I think these things play a very important role. However, if you do not see elections, that's a completely different ball game. If there is no
Mm.
elections, or if there is something else that is going to happen, then these kind of political aggression may, help them gain some more footing in the next government. But if there is, and I think with BNP, asking for the election in their every breath, and the fact that they are the biggest political party at the moment, not organizing a free and fair election is something that is not on the plate for the interim government. So they have to make sure that there is a free and fair election. My understanding, or my view, is that Jamaat-e-Islami has shown their cards in terms of women's empowerment, because many of them
Mm.
have said things, and in speeches and in talk shows, which actually angered women, because they could clearly see how women were not regarded as equal to men. And the fact that we still have lot of work to be done for the women in more backward areas, the marginalized women of different ethnic and religious background, as well as women who are just not allowed access to education or income generating activities in really remote areas of Bangladesh. These kind of women actually need affirmative action to be able to have their agency, which has been cancelled through the cancellation of the quota, which was the basic drive behind the July uprising. So this is also another thing which women are going to face in the coming months and years. Although there
Mm.
are pockets of women who are more privileged and have more access and rights, despite that, we also have too many women who do not have the sort of level playing field that
Mm.
can actually let them contribute to the development of the country with an equal footing.
So that's the Jamaat, which is maintaining its conservative stance. It's shown its cards, but there's a conversation that started with them and women's groups, which is progress maybe in a way that Bangladesh hasn't seen before. But what about other Islamic parties like the Islami Andolan? When we were discussing doing this podcast a couple of weeks ago, you said that the Awami League under Sheikh Hasina had actually kept these extremist tendencies of these parties under check. I mean, that might simply be because of the very autocratic nature of Hasina and her government, but still, they were being kept under check.
Everyone was being kept under check, so so no
Hmm.
one had a sort of way to speak out. Anyone
Right.
who spoke out could actually get picked up, and the disappearances and the gooms and the enforced, the Aina Ghar, you probably know already about these. So any dissent would be addressed in a very aggressive manner and with a lot of violence. However, these groups, you cannot really expect in a democracy that some groups, for just being having a different kind of ideological positions about politics, needs to be shut down. So what Sheikh Hasina
Hmm.
did was an autocratic rule, which actually was so authoritarian that no one could speak out. Now it's an open space, people can speak out, and because of these groups have very extreme ideas, my understanding is they have very little electoral prominence. So, in order to sort of
Mm.
gain some footing in the sort of bigger picture of the national politics, they are trying to, make as much noises as possible so that they can be treated as relevant. Because otherwise, they're, if you think in terms of their percentage of votes and things like that, they're really negligible. And also the fact that the left is very weak and it's disorganized, and it's divided among itself, and it has been ruined like many others. For that matter, these Islamic groups who are actually very vocal and making a lot of noise at the moment, I think this is also a political strategy for them to remain relevant in the political sphere. Women and
Mm.
minoritized population gets afraid of these kind of noises, and very likely it's very normal, and because they threaten our very existence and survival and our accessibility and flexibility and our mobility as well, so they do get really scared and afraid of these kind of things. So the here again, the role of the government would be crucial and paramount. If they cannot create a space where they can say that if you have word against words instead of words against physical attacks or harms, you cannot really let that
Right.
happen um, to the women or men, anyone in this country. So the basic rule of law has been not been restored completely because of all these the police are not here, so they, a lot of them left and never came back, and their morale is really down, and because no one listens to them, things like that.
You've mentioned how the women's movement is, fighting on several fronts right now. But I just want to go back to the Hasina years and what happened to the feminist movement in Bangladesh in those years. Did they also suffer from the same clampdown on freedoms that was happening across the board?
I'd say that the negotiation was in a different form. So because
Mm.
Hasina clamped down on different kind of fractions of Islamic politics, women's organizations were actually the NGO-based women's movement actually was quite going along with Hasina's regime. So they were supporting Hasina's regime as quote unquote women friendly. Similar things we have seen in among cultural activists saying Hasina's government was culture friendly. So they did not do anything. They did not do any plays or things that would be regarded as anti Awami League, or even
Mm.
anti to any policies that the government would take. So they were actually, I would say that they were institutionalized feminist movement, or the feminist movement was very dependent on the government funding, approval, things like that. There were a lot of people who were at the forefront of feminist movement. However, they always were in favor of the Awami League government because there was a sort of nexus of relationship, and these relationships were for give and take. So what suffered at the end is the cause of women. What suffered is despite these all these NGOs and all these funding that came to Bangladesh in the name of women's empowerment, the real work in this within the society to create an understanding, a perception about how men and women should be treated equally as citizens beyond the way
Mm.
the society or religion or value system lets them, has never been set out at all. It never started even. It was always things which were on surface level because they had to support the government. And that's why the sort of profound work has never been done to the point that we would see changes in the society. Because even if you think in terms of the 5 decades after the independence, the amount of funding that came in for quote unquote women's empowerment, if that actually was put into the right places, and the conversation with the religious leadership has never taken place. because this was something which was a no-go region. The real work of women being treated as citizens, as equals, have never even started. Not in the textbooks, not in the schools and colleges, and not also through conversation between women leader and religious leaders of either of the religions. I would say not even in case of the
Right.
Hindus in Bangladesh, and with the sort of minoritization of Hindus in Bangladesh and the threats and vulnerabilities that they're facing now. Even when, for example, we were talking about the report of the Women Commission, which actually proposed to have a sort of like not mandatory right to sort of, have inheritance if the parents are willing to give the inheritance. So this is something which is not
Right.
obligatory at all. People can choose a religious way of inheritance, or they can choose civil way of inheritance. That has
Mm.
been, very negatively reacted upon by both Islamic leaders as well as Hindu leaders. I think the similar things would be happening in the, for the indigenous ethnic minority communities from the Chittagong Hill Tracts even. Because when we were organizing the Moitri Jatra, we've had to face all this because there are different kinds of feminists,
Mm.
different kinds of women's rights activists who wanted to gather and speak out for their basic rights, but on many issues they did not actually agree, and that's when we could actually see the crevices where Hindu leaders and Muslim leaders were speaking the same language. So this is something that,
But
yeah,
pushing back
yeah.
against women.
So inheritance right is something
Right.
which makes it happen.
Can you take us through some of the other important provisions? I mean, the recommendations of the Women's Commission. I know there are more than 400, but what were the main ones that are being discussed or the ones that are points of the most friction right now?
Points which are more frictioned, I would talk about those later. Let me point out or
Mm.
identify the more, the points that I think was revolutionary to even, is to start out. For example, in we have been trying to sort of, make this uniform family code so that there is a civil law in terms of inheritance, in terms of divorce, and in terms of guardianship of the children after divorce. So this is something
Mm.
which women's rights activists have been fighting for at least 2 or 3 decades. So now, in the beginning, it was among a very few of the early feminists, but later on, it kind of grew on us, and we kind of realized that it's something that needs to be put in place so that women's basic rights are, awarded. So one thing is that the civil option to marry, to inherit properties, and also to be able to go through divorce and get the guardianship of their children. This is something that women of Bangladesh needs. It's because now we are more active in the employment and labor market, so women are earning their income, and they're actually the sole earner of the family, with
Mm.
a lot of desertion and divorce by the husbands, and a lot of husbands leaves
Yeah.
outside because they are migrant laborers. So a lot of women have to do a lot of things in Bangladesh. So that's why these are important things that we needed to be in place. So that's a very important one. The other ones related to the rights of female workers, working class women, is another important place where we need to celebrate what they proposed. So equal rights in
Mm.
terms of payment and other different types of leaves and other different types of rights of workers, especially for migrant workers, because a lot of Bangladeshi migrant workers are women and who goes majorly to Gulf countries where they are often physically abused, sexually abused, and to the point that they're brought back as dead bodies. When it becomes costly to do this kind of crimes,
Yeah.
then they will have to change the way they do their business. So, and which actually will indirectly benefit women workers, women migrant workers. And also skills training, as well as provision of daycare centers, provision of paternity leave, maternity leave. These kind of things are very close to the sort of changing, demographics of Bangladesh, with the fact that women are now in the labor force. They are breadwinners in many families. They also talked about how women from different indigenous ethnic minority background are marginalized, and this is reinforced intersectionally, right? So that's also something that they brought into the attention. They also brought into the attention of treating household unpaid labor as part of the sort of contribution of in the family. So
Mm.
these are all important avenues where this interim government and the elected governments needs to work to make sure that women's voices are heard. And even the fact that they proposed 300 new seats in the parliament for women is something which was contested very
Mm.
much, which I think will be contested by many radical feminists as well. However, it's because
Yeah.
it's not really doable at the moment, because we
Mm.
currently have 350 reserved seats for women. Election Commission, Reform Commission proposed 100 seats reserved for women, but for direct election. Same was proposed by the Constitution Reform Committee, and same was proposed
Mm.
by some of the women's organizations. However, these specific commission proposed 300 seats. So when I asked the commission head, like, why did you ask for so many? Then she says, like, let us just, demand the tank. They will give us only a knife, we know. So this is something that like, for this matter, we have always been told to aspire less because society or powerful people would not let us have it. They won't give us anything. So this time, they actually wanted to speak out for the highest possible demands. So if we can achieve all of these, then it will be Sultana's dream, the Naristan that Begum Rokeya wrote like 100 years ago. However, the way the Islamist parties and even the other less, religious or more secular kind of parties reacted to this tells us very clearly that we have a long way to go, because the most frictioned talked about reform recommendations were not really the most important ones. These were the ones that they picked out, cherry picked, to delegitimize the commission and its proposals and recommendations. Because the recommendations were revolutionary. When you want to see women have the equal right in terms of inheritance,
Mm.
in terms of all other areas in life, all other walks of life, then they get really threatened. So, in order to, stop us from wanting that. And since right after the submission of the report, Professor Yunus said that this needs to be, printed out and given out to every Bangladeshi possible. That's
Mm.
his initial reaction was to the report, because it's such
Yeah.
a manifesto. So then they got really scared that if these things starts to be executed, then women will be, getting more and more of their equal share and rights, and that actually threatens the way they do their politics, right? And that's why the response was quite sharp, and it came out from every possible corners. So because women are supposed to not even want what they desire, they will always have to, tone down their dreams. Um, this is also, I think, another revolutionary moment that Bangladeshi women who have been consulted by the commission actually projected their highest dreams, and
Mm.
these highest dreams have been included in the commission report.
if you could sum up, what do you see in the immediate future for women in Bangladesh?
A lot of struggle. And, like, because of the political culture is so that women's opinion about politics is not, it's always regarded as irrelevant because women, quote unquote, do not understand politics. And it's always men who would, have the final say. Uh, so in that within that political culture, when women actually are trying to get their space on that podium or on that table of discussion and debate, there is a lot of pushing and shoving. So you could see some of them on cameras on inside the frames, that how pushy the men are. And when when you are in the public sphere, in the public eye, you are already treated as a bad woman, right? You are not a good woman, right? You are a careerist, you are materialist, you are feminist, whatever. So these are all curse words for women. However, the women who have been slut shamed and named as, cursed, using so many words, have been using the same lesson that they learned from the uprising, where the students reclaimed the word razakar. So women were reclaiming the word besha, or like slut. So they were trying to do that as well. And that received a lot of repercussion from the society as well. However, they did not flinch, and they were like, okay, it doesn't matter, they're slut shaming us even now. So because they're so fierce, is, I think, even if you didn't do anything, even if you didn't say anything, just being present in all these different kinds of protests against violences against women, they could be targeted by anyone. So not even saying anything, just being present there made you vulnerable. So when it becomes so costly to even be present in one of the protest events, then people no longer are afraid with the same tag. So the
Right.
stigmatization has been overplayed, and I think women kind of responded to it in a very political manner.
Right. Samina, I'm going to ask you the last question I normally ask all my guests. Can you give us 3 recommendations? These can be books or movies or other podcasts, so that the listeners can better understand the status of women in Bangladesh and the history of Bangladesh's feminist movement.
The first one that comes to mind is Sisters in the Mirror by Ilora Shehbuddin, which came out, I think, last year or the year before that. Also, Rokia Shakawat's Sultana's Dream is a fiction, but it's a fiction written 110 years ago. But it still gives you an understanding of where we Bangladeshi women still are. So it seems similar to whatever Rokia Shakawat was writing about. But there are many literature if you want to explore, because Bangladeshi women movement and the achievements in development sector, for example, are widely celebrated. If you even think in terms of Professor Yunus microcredit, there is a lot of women empowerment related literature on that. So NGO development, there is a huge literature. Climate change and how it affects women in different parts of Bangladesh is another big chunk of literature. Then women in politics, in local government, in CHT, like more about marginalized, vulnerable women groups. There has been a lot of, I would say, academic work done. History related one, the one that I think about is Ilora's book.
Samina, thank you so much for being here today and for this comprehensive discussion. I think, like you said, there is a struggle in the immediate future of women in Bangladesh, but also some hope with the Women's Commission report. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you
this
for having
discussion.
me, Nantara and Himal. Thank you.
That was Samina Luthfa on the State of South Asia podcast. If you like this episode, leave us a comment or write to us at editorial@himalmag.com. Tell us what you want to hear about on this podcast. Go to our website himalmag.com and read more on Bangladesh, like Cyrus Naji's piece on the future of Bangladesh's fragile media freedom. You'll find the link to that story and many more in the episode notes. Don't forget to tune in to the South Asia Review of Books podcast with Shweta Srikanthan. Follow the Himal South Asian podcast channel on your podcast app to find all our latest episodes, and you can share, rate, and review them. You can also sign up for our newsletters to keep up with Himal's work. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. We'll be back soon with another in-depth conversation on the next episode of State of South Asia with me, Nantara Narayanan. Thank you for listening, and see you then.